This is All Things Considered with NPR. I'm Ari Shapiro, and today's topic is immigration. I'm joined by two scholars in Mexican American Studies from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Dr. Maria Hernandez is an assistant professor whose specialty is the topic of the border. Her recent book, Beyond Smoke and Mirrors, is currently on the New York Times bestsellers list. Dr. Hernandez, thanks for being with us.
It's good to be with you.
We are also joined by Dr. Margaret Sanchez, who just published an article in the OAH Magazine of History on Mexican immigration to the United States. She is currently working on a book, Borderlands, that should be published later this year. Dr. Sanchez, welcome to the program.
Hi, Ari. Thanks for having me.
As you both know, the campaign launch of Donald Trump in the 2016 U.S. election brought the topic of immigration to the forefront of the national discussion.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
There's a lot to unpack about the history of immigration from Mexico to the United States. Can the two of you help give us a historical context of the events that have led to the state of affairs in the present? Let's start our story in the early 1800s.
Thomas Jefferson's Louisiana Purchase had greatly expanded the territorial possessions of the United States. The War of 1812 had reinforced that the United States was a sovereign nation. Inventions like the steamboat and telegraph allowed quick communication between citizens on different ends of the country. The Second Great Awakening called for salvation of the pagans in the West. Gold would soon be discovered in California. Southerners were eager to expand their territory for the cotton trade, which rested on their slave empire. Politicians would use these, among other arguments, to justify a growing ideology. This was known as manifest destiny, the idea that God had destined the United States to expand and control much of the entire continent.
Meanwhile, Mexico had just recently won its independence from Spain. The Mexican government encouraged Americans traveling west to settle in the underpopulated territory of Texas. This invitation came with strings attached. The settlers were to become Mexicans and convert to Catholicism. Mexico outlawed slavery in 1829, and Texans were not willing to follow suit. Relations quickly deteriorated, leading to war between the forces of Mexico's dictator Santa Anna and the Texans, which were supported by the United States. Texas soon became an independent country, later to be annexed to the United States. This infuriated Mexico, who could no longer have the prospect of reclaiming their lost territory.
The pace of manifest destiny reached its peak in the 1840s, following the election of James K. Polk. What happened next?
Polk ran on the platform of manifest destiny, calling for the westward expansion into Texas, California, and the Oregon Territory. His 54-40 or fight campaign slogan threatened war with Britain if the Oregon Territory was not ceded to the U.S. Growing tensions with Mexico made it infeasible for Polk to acquire the entire territory from Britain. The two nations compromised and split the land, allowing the U.S. to turn their attention south.
Mexico and the United States disputed where the border of Texas was located. The U.S. argued that the border was located at the Rio Grande River. This was not Texas's historical border, and it would give the United States even more of Mexico's territory. President Polk offered Mexico $30 million for the extra territory, in addition to New Mexico and California. Mexico was outraged and rebuked the United States in the strongest terms. The expansionist president vowed to force Mexico's hand. U.S. forces were ordered to advance into the disputed territory, effectively invading Mexico's borders. When Mexican troops fired on the Americans, Congress, also overtaken by the spirit of manifest destiny, overwhelmingly approved a declaration of war. Mexico was vastly outmatched, and Mexico City was quickly captured. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended the war. The U.S. was ceded Texas, California, and the New Mexico Territory, half of Mexico's total territory. Mexico was paid $15 million for the land, the same amount Jefferson had given Napoleon 40 years earlier. The terms of the treaty allowed for Mexicans living in the surrendered territories to become American citizens. Approximately 90% of Mexicans chose this option.
And the United States would later purchase additional territory from Mexico in the 1854 Gadsden Purchase. Many in both countries felt the U.S. would expand further into Mexico. The impending Civil War and later Reconstruction would help to curb the spirit of manifest destiny in the United States. The mass movement of people between the two countries began towards the end of this century. Where did we go from here?
The acquired southwestern territories were fertile grounds for agriculture corporations. They were happy to take advantage of the millions of Mexican workers displaced by Porfirio Diaz's Order and Progress programs. Migrants helped to make the southwestern farming an extremely profitable enterprise in the United States. When the Great Depression rocked the nation's economy, the U.S. no longer looked favorably towards these workers. Mexicans were now regarded as an unnecessary strain on the system, competing with unemployed American workers. Mexico welcomed these workers back to the homeland, hoping that the Mexican economy would be bolstered by the technologies and skills that had been acquired in the United States.
It certainly seems that the United States welcomed immigrants when it was beneficial and turned them away when it was costly. Tell us what happened when the Second World War revitalized the American economy.
The departure of huge numbers of American soldiers created labor shortages in areas such as agriculture. The U.S. was now willing to accept Mexican workers again, instituting the Bracero program in collaboration with the Mexican government. The program was a policy failure from the beginning. Greedy corporations, ineligible Mexicans chasing the American dream, and poor border patrol resulted in more illegal immigrants entering the U.S. than those legally entering through the Bracero program. After the war ended, the U.S. soon decided that the migrant situation needed to be handled. President Eisenhower ordered Operation Wetback, a program of mass deportation of illegal immigrants. Immigration from Mexico would plummet until the 1970s, in part due to a time of economic growth for Mexico known as the Mexican Miracle. And this is an important point. In times of economic health, Mexico has not seen large numbers of its people trying to enter the U.S. When the Mexican economy suffers, we begin to see increases in immigration.
And NAFTA has only made the economic disparity worse, but that is for another discussion. So, now that we have examined the historical events leading to our current situation, Dr. Sanchez, what is Mexico's current view of the situation?
Well, Ari, there are many different opinions that we could consider, but let's focus in on Mexico's government, which, of course, is looking out for the best interest of their citizens. Even if they are residing in the United States illegally, the Mexican government still feels a responsibility to make sure immigrants have the best chance at a decent life. And we really see this beginning with the last president, Vicente Fox, who met with President Bush in 2001 to discuss legalization of immigrants already in the United States. In addition to this, Fox suggested a guest worker program that would allow Mexican citizens to work legally in the United States. Unfortunately for his efforts, the 9/11 terror attacks later that year increased U.S. monitoring of foreign entry. The exchange with Bush did not result in any legislative changes.
And the United States was extra cautious concerning immigrants following the September 11th attacks.
You're right, Ari. The United States passed a Border Protection and Illegal Immigration Control Act in 2006, really dashing the efforts of President Fox.
So, what has Mexico's plan of action been from here?
The Mexican government is addressing three major concerns. First, for their undocumented immigrants, Mexico has established official representatives as consultants in the United States to provide legal guidance. On May 13th, the Mexican government set up a pop-up office in Lower Manhattan to increase immigrant accessibility to important documents like their passports. Using their passports, immigrants can more easily apply for residency and naturalization in the United States. Second, in working with the United States government, the current Mexican government has been suggesting methods to control the flow of workers and pushing for legality for citizens already in the United States. And lastly, the Mexican government aims to work with U.S. communities affected by migrants to reduce tension between citizens of the two countries. Under the new Trump presidency, the Mexican government advised their citizens to be aware of their actions and proceed with caution to reduce minority violence.
Concerning President Trump, how has Mexico responded to the president's rather belittling comments?
Well, when it comes to Trump's more affronting comments, President Nieto has kept his silence and not risen to the bait. And while they have not announced a state of alarm, Mexico has definitely recognized that undocumented immigrants are in a more precarious position under this new presidency. President Nieto's plan is to maintain peace with Trump and negotiate any problems that arise. In response to Trump's threat of large-scale deportation of undocumented immigrants, Nieto requested that Trump execute the deportation in an ordered and coordinated way with no loss of remittances. Nieto is looking out for the safety of immigrants in the U.S. without risking the loss of Mexico's greatest trading partner.
Even more importantly, how has the Mexican government responded to Trump's calls for the border wall?
Trump and the last president of Mexico, Vicente Fox, had a round of public exchanges. President Fox angrily declared that Mexico would not be paying for the wall. Listen to Trump's heated response.
So I get a call from one of the reporters yesterday, and they said, the president of Mexico said they will not, under any circumstances, pay for the wall. What is your comment? I said, the wall just got 10 feet higher. It's true. It's true.
The current president, Enrique Peña Nieto, took a calmer approach to the situation. Here's Nieto himself.
Lo he dicho una y otra vez. México no pagará ningún muro.
Trump continued to insist that Mexico pay for the wall, leading Nieto to cancel a scheduled meeting earlier this year. It does not appear that they will come to an agreement here in the foreseeable future. Dr. Hernandez, give us some statistics on this project through the eyes of the U.S. I know we are all wondering, can Trump make this wall happen?
As we have all heard, Trump has created a plan to build an impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall between the United States and Mexico. The wall will cover 1,000 miles of the 1,900-mile border, and the rest of the border will be taken care of by natural obstacles. Trump wants the wall to be made of concrete, and according to an engineer from New York, 1,900 miles of wall would require 339 million cubic feet of concrete. That is 3 times more than the Hoover Dam. And although that estimate is based on a 1,900-mile wall, it is also based on a wall that is 5 feet beneath the ground and only 20 feet above. But Trump wants the wall to be at least 30 feet high and possibly up to 55 feet high.
Wow, I'm sure there are some financial worries about that. Can you tell us anything about them?
According to Trump, the cost of the wall will be between $10 and $12 billion, but engineers beg to differ, estimating that the cost of the wall will be between $12 and $15 billion. The current 650 miles of fence cost more than $7 billion and is not even close to impenetrable, physical, tall, or beautiful. All factors included, the Washington Post has estimated that the cost will end up being closer to $25 billion. Other factors that will lead to increased costs are the fact that Trump plans to extend the wall into extremely remote and mountainous regions, and parts of the 1,000 miles will cross private land that would have to be purchased or have financial settlements made with the owner.
One of the main questions that has been raised is, who will pay for the wall? Do you have any insight on that?
Trump has insisted that Mexico pay for the wall, but as we have heard, current President Enrique Peña Nieto has made it clear that that will not happen. Trump says that U.S. taxpayers will have to cover initial funding, but Mexico will pay for the rest. Trump has several plans for receiving money from Mexico, but nothing is official yet. His first idea is to raise tariffs on Mexican imports by 20%. His second idea is to put an end to remittances or else tax them. Money sent back to Mexico from migrants in the U.S. accounts for $25 billion a year. He believes that if he threatens to put an end to remittances, that Mexico will give in and pay for the wall. But if that doesn't work, he believes that taxing remittances would bring in a large sum of money, although not enough to fund the wall. The problem is that Mexicans will find a way around this by using third parties to wire money, as opposed to wiring companies. Trump's final idea is to increase travel visa and border crossing fees, targeting countries that have a bad record of illegal immigration. He would increase fees on both cars and individual people crossing the border.
Although these ideas may seem somewhat realistic on paper, do you actually think Trump's plan is realistic?
Ari, because of the economic burdens that the wall will create, it does not seem realistic, especially since the Washington Post believes that the wall will end up costing closer to $25 billion. When asked if Trump believes that his plan for the wall is realistic, he responded by saying, "It's realistic if you know something about the art of negotiating. If you have a bunch of clowns negotiating, it's not realistic."
So, where does that leave us? What do you think the best hope for the immigration problem is?
In my personal opinion, I think that Vicente Fox put the nail on the head in an interview with Fox News in 2006 when he stated Mexico needs an economy that citizens will not want to migrate from. In this interview, Vicente Fox pushed for investing in education and expanding job opportunities for a better standard of living in Mexico. And I stand by him with that train of thought. It may be a long road before Mexico can achieve this, but I believe improving Mexico's economy would solve the root of the problem.
Well said. Mexico is our neighbor. Problems in Mexico are often felt in the United States. There is common ground for us to work together, such as curbing the influence of the drug cartels, as well as minimizing poverty in both of our nations. Mexico and the United States are both sovereign nations who must pursue what is in the interest of their own people. But there's plenty of room for cooperation and mutual self-respect. I'm Ari Shapiro. This has been All Things Considered with NPR. Thank you both for joining me.